Good morning, everybody. Bonjour, buenos dias, buongiorno, guten morgen. Thank you for being another day with us. This is our fifth webinar, and really it's a pleasure to be here with you. My name is David, as you probably already know, and today we got a really interesting topic. I'm sure that this is the topic that many of you were looking for. We will talk about the cloud. We will talk about BarTender and the cloud, how BarTender can be used in the cloud. Other details, delays, I just hand over to Ian.
Okay, so hello everyone, welcome. Yes, today we're going to be talking about BarTender 2021, the current release, and how it relates to its use in the cloud. Cloud exists. How does BarTender work with that? To begin, okay, so BarTender in the cloud. My name is Ian Cummings. I'm Senior Sales Engineer at Siegel Scientific here in EMEA. And yes, today we're going to look at the current state of BarTender and how it can be implemented in a cloud environment. Taking a look at the agenda, as before with some of the other webinars that we've done recently, we will first be looking at a PowerPoint presentation where we'll be going through the different aspects of this topic. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll then go on to the actual software itself and examine parts of the software and talk about how it can be used in the cloud. My laptop that I'm using today, I'm not connected to a cloud instance or architecture, so I can't show you any cloud specific stuff, but we can certainly discuss it. And hopefully we'll have lots of time for questions and answers at the end. Although please feel free to ask during the presentation, as we'll probably cover some of the questions during the session. Okay, so BarTender, as you guys all know, is very much a Windows application solution that historically has been very much orientated towards on-premise deployment and use. However, it is indeed cloud compatible in particular cases, and we'll go through those cases today. First though, perhaps for any who are a little uninitiated on the subject, what is the cloud? Basically, cloud computing is the on-demand availability of computer system resources, such as data storage, processing, computing power, without the need for a direct management of those resources as such by the user, and to make them available over the internet from data centers that are connected to the internet. And of course, these data centers, one of the advantages there is that they can be made to be highly scalable to satisfy a variable number of users. So it doesn't matter if your customers have small number of users or if that can vary to a large number of users. With cloud computing and its on-demand nature, those resources can be quickly and easily made available to their customers to scale in a very responsive way. Much more so than if you were managing your computing needs on premise, on site, where you would need to get and install additional servers if you need additional capacity for your computing requirements. Cloud computing can be limited to a single organization, and this is what's known as a private cloud, or it could be available to multiple organizations, like a multi-tenant server, which is often seen as the public cloud. Cloud computing relies on sharing resources to achieve coherence and economies of scale. So if you imagine at a data center, there are racks and racks of servers, often which those servers are very powerful. Inside those servers, we're making use of software technology such as virtualization and containers that give isolation between customers, between the organizational users of the cloud resources. So it's very easily, because it's making use of software, to make use of hardware between multiple organizations if necessary. Cloud providers are also typically using a pay-as-you-go, a pay-per-use pricing structure, and that can be very attractive to particular customers in terms of how their budgets and accounting functions. And there are various cloud models of operation, and you may well have heard of some of these. And this is how the cloud service is provided to the customer. And the main cloud models are SaaS, PaaS, not sure how to pronounce this one, but EAS, so that's an I there rather than an L. So let's take a look at what those are. So a cloud model describes the level and depth and extent of the computing resources, both physical hardware and software, that are offered to the user as part of the service. So perhaps the most well-known one is SaaS, which is software as a service. And this is the most common form and generally understood form of the cloud computing. And this is where all aspects of hardware and software, including the apps that the end user would interact with, that's all provided as part of the service. So perhaps a very well-known SaaS could be Microsoft Office 365. So that's the online Microsoft Office version. That's all provided as a SaaS to the Microsoft Office users. Next, we come to PaaS, which is platform as a service. It doesn't go to the same extent as what you see with SaaS, but it does offer a complete development and deployment environment into which the customer would be able to deploy and configure their own applications, and to possibly make some to configure some aspects of the hosting environment so that it works well for their particular use case. So this is where they perhaps have their own bespoke software that they want to make available to their users. They would write these typically as some form of web app that can then be accessed over the internet by their customers to perform the functions that they need to do. So this is where the cloud provider is providing a service, a platform rather, that those customers can then make use of to provide their own applications to their own users or customers, as the case may be. And lastly, we come to EAS or IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service. And this is where the cloud provider is really offering the bare bones of what's needed for a cloud complete computing resource. So it's offering the data center facility itself, network and security, and the physical servers and data storage, like the hard drives, that the cloud computers will need. So we have here in diagrammatic form that perhaps makes this more clear. So if we look at the bottom with EAS, we can see the physical building and the infrastructure of that building in terms of the data center, physical building where the servers are located, networking, firewalls, and security. So you've got your routers, your either hardware or software firewalls, load balancers, failover devices, all of that good stuff that highly available servers require. And of course, then the server appliances themselves, the racks of servers, and their associated storage hard drives, onto which the software, operating systems, and of course the applications would be installed. So that's IaaS. Basically, it's a clean sheet onto which the customers of the cloud service can put whatever stuff that they need. Moving on to PaaS, this is where the operating system is already installed and configured and managed for you. Likewise, various development tools, database servers, they're all preloaded and set up, waiting for the extra stuff that the customer, the consumer of the service will bring. So this is where they would add in their own applications, their own systems and services. And with SaaS, this is where the full stack is on offer to the consumers of the cloud service. So the infrastructure, the platform, but also the applications. So again, if we think back to Office 365, the hosted applications will be the Office applications such as Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. So why is the cloud important? Well, in the IT landscape of today, many customers are moving away from using on-premise computing or relying solely on on-premise computing in favor of the flexibility, perhaps the cost savings that making use of the cloud can give them. Now, of course, this can help to reduce their IT resources, particularly with IT people and IT departments can be reduced. And the reason for that is, of course, there's less on-site hardware and associated infrastructure for those companies to worry about. Also, for the IT people who would normally install on-premise software and configure and manage that software, much less need for that, particularly if you're using a SaaS, because that is all done for you to a great extent. And of course, you then have the convenience of highly centralized, highly manageable at the global level when using cloud orientated or cloud located solutions. Also, it's very redundant and scalable. So if a particular server breaks down in the data center, typically it will fail over almost instantaneously to a redundant server, thereby reducing any loss of operation. In terms of money, of course, this would typically be an operational expense, so OPEX, as opposed to CAPEX, capital expenditure. So for the accounting department, how a company manages its money, often this way of paying for computer resources is more suitable for many businesses. So ultimately, the cloud can save the customer both time and money. So obviously, this is why the cloud is an attractive concept to many businesses. However, of course, there are always risks and difficulties of using the cloud. So for example, the classic one is, well, what happens if the internet connection goes down? You're effectively cut off from all of those computing resources that are hosted in the cloud. Therefore, at your factory, warehouse, and offices, what are your failover processes? What's the redundancy you have? What do you do in such a situation? Does your business just stop, or do you have a plan on how to manage such a failure? Also, bringing the subject back to BarTender, because BarTender is essentially a printing application. If BarTender is running in the cloud, how can we get a print job from the cloud server down to an on-premise printer? Because of course, the whole point of a printer is that it is in your factory, it is in your warehouse and offices. It's not going to be in the cloud itself. So we need to somehow transport that print job from the cloud server down to your on-premise printer. That has its own complications, of course. Security is always an item, a question that is high in the minds of many businesses. Security of the business data, both at rest in a database or at transport when being transmitted between your on-premise locations and the cloud. How secure is that? Compliance violations by the host. Is the company that's hosting the cloud server, is it properly in compliance with all the various regulations and laws that are in place, particularly around data security, etc. And of course, malware infections and identity theft. As your computing resources is effectively being passed over to a third party, how can you be sure that such issues not affect you, and does it meet your business's particular requirements to ensure the safety of your computing environment? So these are all factors that customers have to have in mind when considering the use of the cloud. Of course, now we come to the million-dollar question. How does BarTender 2021, which is the current version of BarTender, how does that fit in when it comes to the cloud? So let's take a look. Well, first, we're going to look at the system architecture of BarTender. So in this diagram, we can see at the top some typical roles of end users. And these range from a system admin, production manager, a designer of the BarTender content, a person who makes the approvals if you're using some form of document management, and of course the print operators, so those people who are at the end of the line who execute or make requests for print jobs. Beneath that, we see some of the key BarTender applications. We'll come on to those in just a moment. And beneath that, the various BarTender services. So these are the Windows services that are always running in the background on the BarTender server that are providing executing key tasks of the BarTender system. Now, connected to this, of course, users can access parts of the software via web browser, in particular Print Portal, which is the web application. From a security standpoint, the BarTender system makes use of Active Directory to enforce user and group-based security, so using those security services. And when it comes to printing, we have Siegel Scientific printer drivers for, and the latest count is 6,800 different printer models of industrial class barcode, label, RFID printers. The software itself can, of course, connect to various data sources. First on the line is the ability to make integrations where we're detecting event requests coming from business systems, both software and physical device. BarTender itself can connect to various databases and data files to pull the information that it needs as part of its printing processes. And of course, there's also a REST API, and this is part of the Print Portal web application. So that is going to be very important as we start to discuss BarTender and the cloud. The key applications, as you see there, BarTender Designer, of course, is one of the most important, as this is where you design your BarTender document and, of course, the printing of the BarTender document. Integration Builder allows you to build integrations for connecting with business systems as part of the integration platform. Print Portal is the web app for printing labels over the internet. Printer Maestro for managing and administrating your population of printers and for capturing printer events. Administration Console for administering various miscellaneous aspects of the BarTender software. Librarian for document management and revision control. And lastly, History Explorer and perhaps Reprint Console is kind of associated. These are both applications that connect to the BarTender system database, which is a SQL Server database where we store BarTender generated data. And that can include print job logs, application message logs, but it also includes the document repository used by Librarian. Now, as we can see, the users, the applications are all supported underneath by the various BarTender services and processes. And indeed, we have a few of them now. So first, we have the print engine process. So this is not a service, but rather a process when BarTender is being used in an automated way for printing. So this is a BarTender process, if you like, that is actually executing and producing the print job. And that will be controlled, for example, by an integration. It will be used by Print Portal or Print Station when producing print jobs. The integration service is what sits behind and is a key aspect of the integration platform, as it will host the integrations, listening for events, and then executing actions. And this is very much related to the print scheduler service, which is controlling a collection of BarTender print engines. So the print scheduler service will scale up its use of print engine processes. And we'll talk more about that in a short while. The print router service and the client print service, as you can see, as color-coded, these are related to the print portal web application, and we'll be talking more about that a bit later. And the Print Maestro service, well, as the name suggests, that is very much related to the Printer Maestro application. Printer Maestro application is providing a user interface that allows an admin to monitor and manage printers, whereas the service is used for listening for events, for sharing that information with the BarTender software, and generally communicating data to where it needs to go. I think someone has asked in the chat a question about if you can get a PDF of this presentation, and the answer will be yes, so no worries. Everyone who's attending today will get a copy of the presentation. Also, we have the licensing service, part of the license server, which is managing your software license and the number of printers that it's licensed for. The licensing service, which is installed as each BarTender installation, handles the communication between the BarTender instances. And lastly, we have the BarTender system service. And the main role of this service is to handle the database transactions with the BarTender system database for inserting and updating records generated by BarTender in that system database. So as you produce a print job, the BarTender system service will handle the database transaction to log that print job to the system database, thus freeing that task from the BarTender print engine process. The idea, of course, is to keep everything responsive and executing in quick time without delays. So BarTender 2021 in the cloud. Having looked at the architecture of BarTender, how does this all fit together in the cloud? Well, as mentioned earlier, BarTender has traditionally been an on-premise software solution. However, it is the case that BarTender is already cloud compatible. And when we say it's cloud compatible, specifically we're talking about a cloud service where we're using infrastructure as a service as part of a private cloud. So infrastructure as a service, if you remember, is just the bare bones cloud computing resource. And private cloud means that it's suited for an individual business or enterprise. It's not suitable for, shall we say, multi-tenant solutions. And we'll come on to reasons why such an approach, although strictly speaking possible, is not really supported at the present time. Of course, Print Portal is currently the only really native cloud app of the software suite, as it's a web app. It's an ASP.NET web application, while most other BarTender components are native Windows applications. However, a BarTender server in the cloud can offer additional services, not just the applications themselves. So for example, it can offer license server, so we can host BarTender licensing to your customers' users, and they can access that licensing from the cloud server where it would be hosted. Also, the system database. If we have the database instance located in the cloud, it's a central location for hosting the master document repository if you're wishing to use the librarian software for document management and revision control. And of course, it can also be a centralized location for your various forms of logging. Lastly, cloud printing, of course. That's the main thing that customers want, the ability to have a BarTender instance on a cloud server, which can be used for printing their documents from that cloud server down to the on-premise printers. So again, we'll be looking at that. Oops. So first, we'll take a little closer look at infrastructure as a service. So infrastructure as a service is instant computing resource provisioning, which is managed over the internet. As we saw, it's one of the main types, main models of a cloud service. So as you see there in the box, the IaaS is offering the data center, the networking and security, the physical servers and hard drives themselves. However, what needs to be added is first a virtual machine, because of course, anything in the cloud is normally making use of virtualization, a virtual machine, which is a software rendition of a computer, a logical version of a computer, if you like. And into that, you would need to install an operating system, which in our case will be Windows. So typically Windows Server or some version, and the application software, which again for BarTender would of course be the BarTender suite. Now I say virtual machine here because BarTender, as is currently the case, does not support containers. So if you know what containers are, that's a big subject in itself. BarTender would not be suitable for containerization. Instead, you'll need to make use of a virtual machine on your IaaS or your IaaS private cloud. And of course, this sort of service is offered by the likes of Microsoft Azure, Amazon AWS, and many others besides. Some features, for example, such as the print portal, can be accessed over the public internet, while others, if, for example, you wish to connect to and open the BarTender designer in a Citrix or remote desktop session, for that you would really need a VPN. So it depends on the features that you wish to use. When setting up a server for use in the cloud, there are some considerations you would probably want to take into account. So who and what will be the users that access the cloud server's resources? And what is it that they wish to accomplish? What is it they want to do? Are they just wanting to print labels, to design labels? How would you get those document designs up to the cloud server and various other resources? Will there be a need for local on-site redundancies? What would be the plan should there be a problem there? In which cases and which users would require a VPN connection to the server? Of course, that brings with it various security questions to mind. And of course, how will print jobs be routed from the cloud server? Indeed, how will they be produced and initiated in the first place? But how would that print job be transported down to the on-premise printers? I see a question there. Are there any plans for BarTender for other platforms, particularly Mac OS? This is, I guess, a common question from customers who are Apple users. Well, BarTender is very much a Windows application. Part of the reason for this, of course, are the Windows print drivers. So as we saw earlier, we have over 6,800 printer drivers for industrial barcode printers that are Windows printer drivers. So as you might imagine, software running for other platforms cannot use a Windows printer driver. But this, certainly we are listening to customers, and we are looking at ways in which we can provide solutions to customers running on other platforms that are not just Windows platforms. So yes, we understand the need, and that's something that we are hoping to address in some fashion. In the meantime, of course, Mac OS users can make use of a virtual machine on their workstation to have a virtual Windows computer in their Mac computer and run BarTender in that way. Okay, so first off, the cloud native or the web native application print portal is essentially an application that's used for printing. So the document designs are already created, and it allows you to select and print those document designs following a manual workflow process. Print portal itself is an ASP.NET web application, so it's ideally suited for running on a cloud server. The user would select the already created BarTender documents in a very nice, clean, responsive user interface. The application itself, in addition to printing documents, also supports intelligent data entry forms and some of the actions that can be executed from those forms. Although, word of warning, not all form actions, or not all actions as a whole, are fully supported when used in the print portal context. So there are some actions that need additional work to allow them to be used in the print portal context. So when running it natively on a Windows computer, all is good. But if you then try to deploy that and run that from print portal, you may run into difficulties. And this has to do with the server client architecture as you have with a web application. I see someone's asking about BarTender Ultralight for 2021. Perhaps, David, you'd like to answer that in the chat. It's coming, though, is the answer. And of course, with the print portal application, when it comes to printing, we'll come into this in detail in a bit, we support optimized and driverless internet printing. Printing to PDF, of course, is always an option, and also Windows printing, should it be the case that print portal is used in an intranet environment. Print portal also supports user authentication, and also secure connections over HTTPS. So, of course, it's hosted by an IIS web server, which is the Microsoft web server. You would need to import a digital certificate into the web server in order for the HTTPS to be enabled. So right out the box, you won't have it. You need to set up the IIS server with a certificate. So in terms of the user experience, first they would browse the web application to select their document. With the document selected, typically there would be a data entry form with which the user could input their variable data. So it's a very manual process. A print job is produced and sent to the printer. And lastly, a verification message is presented to the user within the web browser, giving them the status, the verification as to the success or otherwise of the print request. However, Print Portal offers more functionality than just printing, and indeed printing as part of a manual printing process. The web app also performs and is able to perform various document management tasks. So for those users, for example, if you remember from the system architecture, if their role in the company is to make approvals over document designs that are created by the document designers, then these users don't necessarily want to install either the BarTender software on their local workstation PC, or perhaps they don't necessarily need to open the BarTender software as an application via a Citrix or RDP session. Instead, they can perform their tasks within Print Portal's document management functions. So with the tasks that are currently supported, you can visually compare document revisions. So revision 1 can be compared to revision 2, and the differences, the changes between them will be highlighted. So it allows the approver to see what's changed and if the change is correct. They can also view a full history of the document design as it's gone through its design process. They can make additional comments to the document. They can initiate a document transition, which will move the document through its particular workflow to the next step. And of course, if an approval request is being made, the user, as you can see in the graphic there, can choose to approve or reject the change, adding a comment as required. So this can be all done via the web app, not requiring the need to open up either the BarTender application or the librarian application. Question has come in about activating HTTPS in Print Portal. Essentially, you have to go into the properties of IIS web server. Unfortunately, it's out of the scope of what we're going to cover today, but there are various articles on the web about how to add a certificate to your web server. And indeed, we can provide those details as well upon request. Also, on a BarTender installation on a cloud server, of course, is the print engine, which of course you all know is very mature print engine that converts essentially a BarTender document in combination with a printer driver to render native print code. And for example, if you're using a Siegel scientific printer driver, to take full advantage of that class of industrial barcode printer. So of course, we are always looking to optimize and have best performance for our print jobs. And this is particularly important when printing over the internet. Of course, when printing over the internet, as opposed to a nice, fast local area network, by comparison, the size of that print job is going to have an effect on the time it takes to transport that print job down to the on-premise location. So as well as the print engine, Seagull printer drivers are also an important part of what's running on that cloud server. So you have the BarTender application, when in combination with our printer driver, printing to one of these industrial barcode and RFID printers, it's going to result in fast printing. And just to underline again, that is particularly important for internet printing from a cloud located server. Print scheduler. So if you remember from the architecture diagram, this is a Windows service, which is part of the BarTender installation, and it manages a collection of BarTender print engine processes, so that as requests are being made to print, whether that's by an automated process via the integration platform or via manual print requests using the Print Portal web application or even Print Station if on premise, then those print requests are pushed to the print scheduler service, which will scale automatically and on demand a number of print engines in order to cater to that number of requests. Now, this is obviously important for a cloud located server because, of course, it may be the case that you have a variable number of users who are accessing that centralized server in the cloud in order to make printing requests. So that server needs to be able to scale, needs to be able to handle the demand of print requests coming in potentially at a high frequency at the same time, while at other times perhaps being less busy. So the print scheduler service helps to manage your print engines and scale it according to the demand being placed upon it within the confines of that one cloud server. And of course, an advantage of a cloud server is the cloud servers themselves can scale. So if your demand, your requirements for printing goes beyond what a single cloud server instance can offer, the beauty of using the cloud is that it can almost instantaneously spawn additional cloud servers which are configured identically and therefore in a very seamless fashion will be able to offer additional resource to those additional customers, no matter to what scale that is. Of course, if you use additional resources, as it's a pay-per-use model, that would incur additional charges for whoever is managing and running the service. But it very much allows BarTender to be very responsive to demand, whether that's within the one cloud server or multiple cloud servers. Licensing. So with the license server, this 2 is also quite ideal for hosting in the cloud environment, because a business can have, rather than single licenses at each of their different locations, they may choose to have just one mega license located and centrally managed at one location, which could be a head office server on premise, but equally it could also be hosted on a cloud server instance. Of course, the administrator would need to make sure that users of the BarTender software that are running on premise have access to the service and the port on which that service is exposed, so that they can get their printer licensing from the on-premise locations if they have on-premise BarTenders, with the license server that's hosted centrally in the cloud. And of course, the cloud license server can also provide licensing to cloud located instances of BarTender too. The license server from 2019 onwards is using a full TCP/IP connection, which is encrypted, so it's ideal for communicating over the internet in a secure and stable fashion, in a robust way. Users wish to access some of the Windows native applications from the cloud server itself. As has been mentioned earlier, they can do so using either Citrix or RDP sessions, RDP standing for Remote Desktop Protocol, which is the Microsoft version of Citrix, essentially. What this does is provides a remote terminal session view of the Windows computer running on the server, from which the users from their workstations on premise, those clients can access those server installed applications. So for example, a document designer may wish to access the BarTender designer for creating and designing the BarTender documents, rather than having the BarTender software installed on their workstation PC directly. So indeed, you can have that choice. For those users who are in the role of document design, they may choose to install the software locally on their workstation, design the labels there, and then save them to and store them to the cloud server. Or they can choose a remote session, Citrix or RDP, to run the software in the cloud, and therefore have no BarTender software installed on their local PC. However, to do that, they would typically need to have a VPN connection, so a secure network connection between themselves, the workstation client user, and the cloud server. Citrix and RDP will typically offer a native Windows, or these days it's available as a web-based client, so you don't even need to install anything as such on the client PC. And of course, it supports various types of printing architecture, ranging from standard Windows network printing, session printing, where you'd have an instance of the printer driver on the server and a matching instance of the same printer driver model on your workstation PC. But also there's driverless printing, where a print job will be produced and be printable, but it would not be an optimized print job and you would lose the native functionality of the printer. Speaking of BarTender document designers that may be running the BarTender designer on premise, when they go to save their document, particularly if you're using the librarian document management, obviously it'd be most ideal to save that document to a master document repository hosted on the cloud BarTender instance. And indeed, we've done a lot of work to improve the communication and connectivity of BarTender to the BarTender system database, so that taking this approach is entirely workable and feasible. So of course, from the BarTender software running on your local PC, you choose to save, you select your librarian location, and you save the document, making the comments as you would normally. The only difference, of course, is that the document will be saved out over the internet to your cloud server. In my experience, with latest versions of BarTender, you'll find that it will take a few more seconds to open and save documents to such a database. But yes, more or less just that, just a few extra seconds. So from a design perspective, that's when you're designing a document, opening and saving, that's not so important. What would be more important if you were looking to open documents for printing as part of production. A latency of a few seconds to open a document and print would perhaps not be the most ideal, but we'll come on to that in just a short moment. The advantage of having a master document repository is that, of course, the BarTender in the cloud is making use of those fully up-to-date BarTender documents that it will use for printing and its production. But of course, if you have any on-premise BarTenders, you can make use of SQL Server database replication to replicate that master document repository down to any on-premise sites where you need BarTender to be working on-premise for whatever reason. And we'll look at that a bit later. But it's certainly nice to have a master document repository which is stored in a highly centralized location, in a highly available location up in the cloud. Of course, also with the system database, not just for document repository, we have the traceability logging. This is the full logging of print jobs, application messages, security checks, printer events to a system database, giving you a full set of traceability information on the activity that you have performed in the BarTender software. So yes, it's important to remember that this information can be recorded in the cloud server and then made available for viewing and getting that data. So what about integration platform in the cloud? This is a question that's quite often asked by customers. They're wanting to integrate BarTender, for example, with a cloud-based ERP. And therefore, if they had BarTender in the cloud, they could make use of the integration platform to detect the event messages coming from the business ERP, also in the cloud, and then to produce print jobs. The answer here is a bit complicated. As things stand, things are possible, but not necessarily easy, shall we say, out of the box. If we're looking at the Azure cloud platform, there are features such as Logic Apps and Azure Service Bus that would allow an integration between business systems where it receives the request, and then the Logic app, for example, can pass that request on to BarTender for processing. Likewise with the service bus, this is a way of connecting servers and services running on those servers in the cloud down to various other systems, be that in the cloud or on-premise. One of the other problems, apart from just connecting it to an ERP, is the ability to then get the print job from that BarTender instance in the cloud down to the on-premise location. At present, the printing and integration platform is limited to standard Windows network printing. So that, of course, remains a bit of a difficulty in how you would then get the print job down to the on-premise printers. Technologies such as Service Bus can help with the connectivity to do that. Service Bus and its equivalent technologies from other providers, but it's not an out-of-the-box solution that the integration platform can currently give. Of course, this is a key area that we are very much interested in and looking to provide solutions for in the future. Okay, so let's look at that printing architecture that we've spoken about. Well, of course, BarTender's printing architecture, when it comes to a cloud server running an instance of BarTender, we have standard Windows printing, which of course has its limitations in terms of getting the print job down to on-premise printers. It's not ideal by any means. If BarTender is being used in a terminal session such as Citrix or RDP, then we can use the printing technologies that those sessions offer. Electronic documents, this is where the BarTender print job can be rendered to a PDF or an XPS file. So any electronic document format that may be supported either by BarTender natively, such as PDF, or via a third-party printer driver. But perhaps the most important for cloud printing is internet printing, be that optimized or driverless, very much in a similar way to what you saw with the terminal sessions, Citrix and RDP. So when it comes to the internet printing, a key feature here is the print router service. So this is a Windows service that would run on your BarTender cloud server. And its job is, from the server side, to communicate down and make a connection with client users. So on the on-premise locations where the people are located on their workstation devices, accessing perhaps print portal for printing, the print router service provides that connection with that cloud server down to those client users. Its job is to get a list of the available printers and provide the list of available printers to each of the clients, and also as a mechanism for transporting the print job from the server down to the client. So on the client side, we have a client print service. So between the two, the client print service and the print router service, there is a secure connection between them. So this is a separate channel from what the user would use when opening up their web browser and navigating to the web application, print portal, for example. So the print job is actually sent via a separate communication channel, which is first established by the client print service, making a connection out to the cloud server and then connecting with the print router service. So when it makes that connection, it registers itself with the print portal and tells the print portal what printers are available for printing to for that particular user. So it's exposing those printers on the client side to the cloud server. Of course, the user can configure their cloud print service, which they've installed locally on their Windows PC, and that can be configured by navigating to a local URL on their client computer, on their client PC. As you'll notice there, it's using port 5952 and then settings. So localhost simply refers to their own computer. Currently, the client print service is only available as a Windows service. So I guess, again, that doesn't make a friend with the Macintosh computer that happy, or any Linux people out there. But I'm sure in the future, we'll be looking to extend our platform support for the client print service. So when you first access Print Portal, if not already installed, you'll be prompted to download the client print service, which is a Windows service, onto that local PC. And you'll be presented with some information where you can click a link for downloading, then instructions on to install, and then to configure the client print service on your client PC. So when installing, it's just a very simple, straightforward installer, which will step you through the process of installing the Windows service, which has no user interface as such. It's a Windows service that runs in the background. And by default, will install into the Siegel Scientific program directory. Once installed, you simply open up your web browser and either type in the link or click on a link to access the BarTender web print settings on the client side. So from there, you can decide which printers you wish to make available for printing over the internet, and if you wish to share any of those printers for printing. Once the client print service is installed, you have internet printing available to you. And in BarTender 2021, I like to say we have our next generation of internet or cloud printing. So as we see here in the diagram, we have a data center site where the server is located, and an on-premise factory or warehouse site where the user is making use of their web browser and they have a locally installed printer. In this case, for optimized cloud printing, we first, from our web browser, navigate to the print portal website to request a print job. When a print job is produced, we're making use of a BarTender print engine process, which in turn is interacting with a printer driver, producing a print job, which is rendered in native printer code, highly optimized. And that print job is then passed to the print router service to transport that print job from the server side down to the client. And all of this, of course, does not require a VPN connection. It's just over the public internet. Once at the client print service on the on-premise location, the service will then make use of the locally installed printer driver instance to put that print job into the print queue of that printer driver, which of course then transports to the actual physical printer itself. So that is optimized internet or cloud printing. By contrast, we have the driverless cloud printing. And you'll notice the main difference here is we don't have the exact model of printer driver instance installed on the server side. So therefore, when the print request is made to the print portal web application, request is then made to the print engine. We are in fact producing the print job to an intermediary format. So rather than a native print code file, it's in an intermediary format, a generic format, which in turn is then passed to the print router service and down to the client print service. Now, of course, this generic intermediary format is unoptimized. So it's not taking advantage of the features that are provided by the Siegel Scientific printer drivers and by extension, the features in BarTender itself, and therefore is much more graphically intensive. It's not making use of native barcode or RFID commands, won't be able to support real-time clock or RFID at all for that matter, but it will allow you to print your design on the label, albeit in an unoptimized fashion. When the client print service is receiving it, and it can receive it, it doesn't have to wait for the entire print job. It can stream the print job a bit at a time. I think it's like 5 labels at a time. You can stream that print job down to the client print service, which will then produce it as a locally generated print job using the locally installed printer driver. So the end result that gets to the printer, yes, that will be in the native print language of the printer, but the content of that print job will be very unoptimized, very graphically intensive, for example. And because we're streaming it, it will at least be producing that print job in chunks rather than a long wait until one big print job is produced. So the advantage here, of course, is that the printer driver does not need to be installed on the server side. So if the client user is just a new user, they have their own printer that's never been seen before, they can immediately start printing without any provisioning needing to be made on the server side. So there's great flexibility there. Of course, if that user would want to be making frequent print jobs and larger print jobs, well, at that time, they would want to be in contact with the admin of the cloud server, to get that printer driver installed on that cloud server. We have a couple of questions there. Actually, let's go back to the slide. Question is there, can a client be an Android device, for the mobile device? It means that on client there can't be installed printer drivers. Can BarTender work also in this way? Okay, so the client print service is a Windows service. So currently that only supports Windows devices. So a Windows computer would need to be somewhere at the client location in order to be part of the print job transport. Of course, the device that's making use of a web browser, that doesn't necessarily have to be a Windows PC, although the computer here and the client print service are typically and normally on the same computer. But it is feasible to be using a different device with the client print service also being on a different device in the same network. But you would need to do a certain amount of configuration and implementation to get that to work in the way that you wish. But it is possible. However, with mobile device, quite often that implies that the printer is connected perhaps by Bluetooth, or USB for that matter. So the printer is connected directly to the Android or whatever mobile device you're using. Now, to support that, we would need to have a native app for Android or iOS, as the case may be. We had that in the past with the previous version of Print Portal. However, we have not yet updated the Android and iOS app for the new Print Portal. I believe that's something that we're working on. So we'll see it at some point, but it's not available right now. When it is available, of course, then essentially it's running the client print service within the Android app, and therefore would be able to pass on the print job to the locally connected printer. But that's not quite here yet. How is the licensing in case of driverless printing? Well, whether you're using optimized or driverless printing, the fact that the target is a physical printer means that we will count that as a printer license. Printer licensing in BarTender is based on the number of printers that you wish to print to using BarTender. So if your customer has 100 printers that they wish to print BarTender labels with, then they would need a 100 printer license. And this is the case no matter if you're using Print Portal, whether that's as an intranet site within your organization or installed out in the cloud, or whether you're using BarTender as a native Windows application on-premise as well. We will be able to uniquely identify each physical printer that the print job is being sent to ultimately, and that is recorded and tracked as part of the license server. As it comes to electronic documents, if an electronic document is the target, then yes, that moves us to a pay-per-use model. And I believe at the present time, it is for every 2,000 labels or pages, labels as such, of usage, that counts as a single printer license. So every 2,000 labels you produce to PDF, that is a printer license that is consumed. So therefore, if you're printing millions of PDFs, you'll need a suitable number of printer licenses to cover that.
Yeah, and I said that I was going to add some comment on the chat, so on the question, just to answer it. But yeah, I should mention that with PDF right now, the licensing model is that we are counting as one printer license every 2,000 PDF that the customer print generate per week. Yeah, we are having a further discussion because we have some customers who are printing hundreds of thousands of PDF. So we are looking for alternative, but it still is under discussion. Right now, the licensing is one printer license is equivalent to 2,000 PDF per week. Okay.
Okay, so we looked at Print Portal, how it can be used as part of a manual printing process, how it can be used for some document management functions, but also as part of Print Portal, we're exposing a REST API. And this is an application programming interface through REST, which is web-based services, that allows applications and systems to integrate with BarTender for automated printing purposes. So in a way, that is doing the same job as you see with the integration platform, currently in a much more limited fashion. However, because it's the Print Portal, we can take advantage of the internet printing. So if you need some form of integration with a BarTender instance in the cloud, use of the REST API allows that print job to use that internet printing to get that print job down to an on-premise printer without the complexities of using VPNs or service bus or whatever else. So you have your standard internet printing and you lose the complexity. So let's take a look at the REST API. As I said, this is basically web services, REST-based web services. And as it is currently with this version 1, if you like, of the Print Portal REST API, we can do the following functions. If the Print Portal has had the user authentication enabled, then that automated request can substantiate who that user is that's making the request. So it can authenticate the user. Once authenticated, they can use the authentication token that they receive for all of their following requests, so that Print Portal knows that, the person or the user making this request is this person X who has already authenticated themselves. And we'll take a look at each of these in just a short while. So of course, the most important function is to print BarTender documents. And yes, that can include printing BarTender documents with variable data, where that variable data is sent as part of the request. Also, of course, it's useful for the software or system to get a list of the available documents that are usable on the Print Portal server, and also the available printers. And this includes server-side located printers, but particularly for internet printing, the remote on-premise printers. And we're using a standard open API specification. So many web developers will be very familiar with this way of communicating with a web app. And yes, we do very much have more planned for the future. So with the REST API, it's well suited for use with pre-existing ERP type software, particularly if it's running in the cloud, but also for bespoke apps, either running as part of the running as a web application, but also on the client side as well. So you can have bespoke apps that are designed for installation and use on the client, but then will make a REST API requests up to the print portal server for producing a print job back on site or on premise. So such an app would make a request over the internet. It's picked up by Print Portal and its support for the REST API, produces a print job on the server, and then using the print router service, it can transport that print job back down to the client side where the client print service is also running. So it allows system integrators, for example, to produce software that performs certain functions. Some of its functions may be to print barcode labels. In this way, such an application can make use of a hosted BarTender server in the cloud to do all the hosting of the document designs, but printing of those document designs and sending it back down to the on-premise site. So imagine, for example, a restaurant or a cafeteria that needs to print labels for their various food products. They don't want to go necessarily to the expense of installing a full version of BarTender, even if it's like the starter edition. They just want to have access to a very simple set of functionality where they just input some data, press a button, makes a call out to a service out on the internet, and back comes a printed label for their particular and very limited use case of label printing. Such an application, in conjunction with Print Portal in a cloud located server, is ideal for such a solution. First, I'm not going to go too much into detail on the code involved here, but essentially this will give you an idea as to the sort of requests and responses that would be made when you're making use of the REST API. And of course, when you take a look at the presentation that we can make available afterwards, you can do further investigation. So first, if you have authentication enabled, this allows us to identify who is the user that's making the request. Now, of course, with authentication enabled, we can then leverage security on the BarTender side so that, for example, if it's user X, then they only have visibility of documents in a certain folder, and user Y does not have access to those documents. So you can secure different aspects, different parts, different documents of what's available on that cloud server to different users and groups of users. So as part of the authentication request, of course, you'll be passing your credentials. And by response, you will get what's called a token, a bearer token, which is, as you can see, a long encoded value, which you would then use as part of your subsequent requests, saying, okay, this request for printing a label is me, and here's the token that I got earlier. That's how that sort of works. So first off, if we want to get a list of the various document libraries that are available, we would make a GET request for the libraries, and if authentication is enabled, we would pass that bearer token, which identifies it is us that is making that request from where we authenticated earlier. And the response will be information of those libraries, or root folders, as we may call them in Print Portal. So you can have multiple root folders enabled. Some might be of the server's file system, whereas some of the root folders could be in a librarian. And it will give information about each of those root folders, including the name of the folder and the ID, which uniquely identifies that folder. All right, so it looks like we messed up on the calendar entry. Sorry about that. That's inconvenienced anyone. Just looking at the questions and answers there. Secondly, with a library or list of libraries and root folders listed to the client can then make use of the unique ID of one of those libraries, so this number here, to then get a full listing of the various documents and subfolders of that root folder or that library. So with a link to, with information of a particular document, then of course, in the following request for printing, then of course it can refer to that document. But before we get to printing, we need to know what printers are available. So this is where we use the get printers request. And again, we're using the bearer token there to signify who is making the request. That bearer token, by the way, is only used or only needed if Print Portal has authentication enabled. Authentication is disabled by default. So if that's the case, then you don't need to do the authentication. You won't need to use that bearer token. So when you get the request for printers, you'll be given two lists. The server printers, so these are the printers that are available and installed on the server. Now this is of more importance if the Print Portal is being used in an intranet, so in an internal use case, because a print job sent to one of those printers will be sent directly from the server directly to where the printer is located. So the precise port, the IP address or the USB port, for example, of where the printer is located is defined on the server. If, however, the printer is being printed to over the internet from a cloud located server down to an on-premise server, then this is where we see the list of remote printers. Now, as you can see with the name of the remote printers, it is prefixed by what we normally call a UNC path, which is a uniform naming convention. So we have // and what follows is the name of my computer, which is iCummings LT2, but then the fully qualified domain name of the Siegel Scientific domain. So siegelscientific.com is the public part, but corp is the internal part of our network, and then the internal computer, which is my laptop. So this identifies the computer on which my printer is installed on the client side, and then followed by the name of the printer instance. So in this case, barcode printer A, B, or C. This information is passed up, obviously, to the server and is recorded when a print job is produced as part of the print job logging, not print job logging, the printer license logging and tracking. So with the license server, we're able to track where the print jobs have been printed to, and therefore be able to identify each of those printers uniquely, no matter if they're being printed to over the internet or with standard Windows printing over the network. Okay, now we get to the print requests. Now, of course, we can make a print request with just printing a static label, but typically, of course, you'd want to print a label and set variable data on that label as part of the request. And we have currently two ways of setting the variable data. The first is by way of named data sources in the BarTender document. So for those who have often used BarTender to design a document, you can set a name for a data source in that document. So a data source is used by a text or barcode object, perhaps a picture object, to set variable data for that object. When you give it a named data source, so let me rephrase, when you set a name for your data source, it's in essence setting a variable, a public variable for that data source, which can then be set from an external system, such as in this case, the print portal web application via the REST API. So essentially, for our named data sources, we name the data source that we want to set, and then we give it a value. And this is all using JSON payload data. Also, as part of your JSON payload, we want to specify the root folder, or the library ID of where the document is located, and then the name of the document or subdirectory folder and name of the document that we wish to print. The printer that we wish to print to, so here I'm using barcode printer A, number of copies we wish to print, various other attributes you can set, and then in the end, setting the variable data items of our named data sources that are defined in our document. And by response, obviously you'll get a true or false in terms of success. You'll get a print request ID, which identifies uniquely the request that was made, and any messages that were generated as part of that print job. So here we can see that the print job was successfully sent to the spooler. The second way of printing is if the document is making use of a data entry form. So typically for Print Portal, you would design a document which also comprises of a data entry form. So for users who want to print that document using Print Portal via the web application, they can input their variable data through the use of that form. Now, of course, it makes sense that the REST API can also make use of those same documents. But of course, because this is part of an automated request, there's no data entry form being presented to a user. It's one computer system speaking to the other computer system. And therefore, if you wish to print such a document, you can do so in two passes. And what I mean by this is that in the first pass, you don't, in a predefined way, know what data entry form controls is on the document. You simply got a list of the documents in a particular library folder, and you wish to print one of those, but you don't know what the data entry form controls are. So you don't know how to set them. So you make a blind request to print that particular document. And if there are indeed data entry form controls on that document, then a response will come back to the origin saying, failure, there's data entry items for this document. Here is a list of the names of those data entry form controls with their current values. So this gives the receiving application a list of items that it needs to set with variable data. So it's a way of querying that document to understand what variable data items can be filled in, kind of virtually in terms of a form, so that in a follow-up request, so pass number 2, we can set those data entry control values as part of the request. And this, of course, will result in a successful print job. Question here, do the print request IDs show in the system service as a message in the log? Oof, that is a good question. I guess the answer is I don't know without looking. So that's probably one we have to get back to you on. It should be noted that with this two-step process, at the first step, I'll go back to this page, where we make the request, you'll notice that it does return a print request ID. So this is important when you come to the second request to then specify that request ID so that we're reusing what was already half requested as like a caching option, I suppose. So that we'll say, okay, reuse that request from earlier, but here's the variable data that you asked for, like so. So yes, this is very much version 1 of the REST API. It provides, so to speak, a minimum viable product for applications that wish to make use of printing over the internet in an automated fashion. Certainly we'll be very interested to hear from yourselves as users as to the sort of features and functions that you would like to see added. So please feel free to get in touch with us and to make those suggestions. Of course, we already have quite a number of ideas ourselves that we're currently working on. So I've spoken a lot about would be running on that cloud BarTender server, that cloud located BarTender server. But what about the stuff that's happening on premise? Well, of course, as mentioned before, it may be the case that it makes most sense for your users to have a locally installed instance of BarTender so that they can use and make use of BarTender Designer in a fully native environment. So it's much more interactive than using Citrix or RDP session. Or rather not interactive, but more responsive, should I say. Although those sessions are pretty good these days. So BarTender Designer is certainly very much a good use case of why you'd want to run the software on premise. Of course, the designer can be set up so that we're connected to a system database in the cloud, so that when you save a managed document, you can save that directly to the master document repository on that cloud server. Of course, the integration platform, particularly important for production printing as an automated service where fast, time dependent, as little latency as possible, printing is required. There's always going to be a case for on-premise automated printing, which the integration platform very much does fulfill that role, particularly for equally on-premise business systems and software. With a BarTender on-premise server running the integration platform, it receives those requests from the business system to the integration service, makes use of the print scheduler service, which manages the BarTender print engines to produce the print job for a Windows printer driver. So the integration platform, again, is always going to be very much an important part of on-premise use case of the BarTender software. Backup license server. Now, of course, it could be selected to run and operate the master mega BarTender license up in the cloud. But if you have, let's say, a factory or warehouse with mission critical printing requirements, you may want to have a little bit more assurance than simply making use of the 72-hour grace period should availability of the license server go down. With BarTender 2021, we introduce backup and triad redundancy options. And in the context here, it would be a backup license that you would set up so that on your on-premise BarTender server, you would have a backup license server running, so that your BarTender workstation by default would reach out to the license server in the cloud for its printer-based licensing. Be that the workstation or the production server. But if connection to the cloud is broken, then instead, either the on-premise server or workstation can get its licensing from the backup license server, which is on-premise. Now, there's a connection, as you see, between the two license servers because they can communicate with each other and update each other on their current licensing state. But if connection to the internet goes down, then that backup license server takes over and provides printer licensing to the on-premise server and the on-premise workstations. It should be noted that the communication protocol for printer licensing, firstly, that happens after the print job has been produced. So the idea is to not affect the performance of producing print jobs and getting a print job created. But also, in order to minimize the amount of communication between a BarTender instance and the license server, the BarTender will batch together printer license usage into batches. So rather than for each print job produced, we send a communication to the license server. Instead, it will batch those various uses, print job uses together, and then send a batch at some point later on, thereby reducing the amount of communication that goes back and forth between license server and BarTender. So this approach, making use of a backup license server, gives additional redundancy to those mission critical uses. Also, as was mentioned earlier, the document repository. If you're making use of a master document repository up in the cloud on an instance of BarTender, if you're also making use of on-premise bartenders, be that for integration platform or for whatever other use, it is probably the case that you'd want to have a local copy, a local repository that's replicated down to that on-premise location, both in terms of redundancy, but also in terms of performance. So by default, particularly for printing production, so if we imagine the integration platform running on premise, that particular bartender instance would be best connected to a replicated bartender system database, which includes the document repository at that local location, at that on-premise location. The replication of the master database would therefore be made down to that production on-premise database, keeping it up to date. But in terms of the use of the data on that on-premise system database, it's just for reading, for producing production. Any design work, any modifications or edits would ordinarily best be done to the master database instead, with updates replicating down to the slave databases, the replicated databases at the on-premise location. And in this way, it allows you to very effectively distribute down your documents from a very centrally managed document repository down to the various replicated repositories that are used by on-premise software. So here we see an overall global diagram of what a cloud install or a bartender installed in a cloud instance might look like. So here in the center we have the internet, and of course there's a cloud server using infrastructure as a service cloud model. And on that cloud server, we of course have the print engine for producing print jobs, the print scheduler, which is controlling a collection of print engines, a set of printer drivers so that the server can produce print jobs rendered in the native print language of the various printer models that need to be supported. It can manage, let's get the highlighter, shall we? Laser pointer. It can manage a centrally hosted license server. It can host the system database for a master document repository and also for centralized traceability logging. The print portal web application itself for users to access via their web browser to, in a manual fashion, select and print labels. The REST API that gives functionality of print portal to automated processes and business software for making requests for printing over the internet. It's hosting the print router service, which is involved in transporting that print job down from the server down to the clients for internet printing. And of course, it can host RDP and Citrix sessions for users who want to access the BarTender software directly on the cloud located instance of BarTender. Now, fitting into that, here at the corporate head office, we have a user who has the BarTender software installed locally on their workstation. So they're using the software in a local fashion. They can access the printer licensing from the cloud, should they be printing for testing purposes or even normal printing processes. but also when they design the document and they want it to be a managed document, they can store that document up in the cloud server in the master document repository. However, to do this, they would need typically a VPN connection to satisfy the security requirements. Over here to the right, we have a factory. And on this factory, we have an on-premise BarTender server. So this is an instance of BarTender that's installed on a local server. And of course, just like with the workstation user, it can connect to the cloud for printer licensing. It can make use of a backup license server just in case it needs redundancy. And we can replicate that master document repository from the cloud down to the on-premise server. So the idea being here, this on-premise server is running the integration platform for integrating with local ERPs, local business software or devices, and it will open documents from that replicated document repository for better performance, of course, rather than opening over the internet, but also for purposes of redundancy, so that should the connection to the cloud go down, still has a repository for the documents, still has a local licensing service that it can use to carry on with its automated production printing. Where the use of a cloud instance of BarTender does come in is the use cases where we're connecting over the public internet. So a user making use of their web browser to navigate to the print portal website, they select their labels, they input their data, they press the print button. The print job is then transported back down to the client print service, which then routes through a printer driver to their target printer. Likewise, if instead of the print portal web application, they're making use of a bespoke web app that's been created, they would interact with that web app, making a REST API request to print portal on the cloud server. Print job is produced and sent back again to the client print service at that local location and on to the physical printers. So this encapsulates quite well some typical use cases of a BarTender instance installed on a cloud server. So what's next? Well, we at Siegel Scientific understand the importance of the cloud to our customers and the manner in which it can be leveraged. Therefore, please guys, be reassured that we very much are listening both to yourselves as partners and to our customers, what sort of requests, what needs that they have. Be assured that we're busy, hard at work, building what's next for BarTender. And certainly in due course, when we are ready, we will be making announcements as to indeed what is next for BarTender. Meanwhile, please be welcome to send us your input and your feedback on what you'd like to see, why it's important to you, why such functionality is needed, because we very much value such information as we move ahead with BarTender. And now, certainly already we've had a bunch of questions, but more questions can be asked, but we can also go hands-on with the software. And when we go hands-on the software, we of course are mostly looking at, the print portal web application. So if I open my web browser, here we see our Siegel Scientific website. Incidentally, you'll see on the home page of our website that we have recently published a new book on how to streamline the supply chain. And indeed, I think it's this one here, which is a nice book of, 42 pages that takes you through various, page down please, various aspects of labeling, for the supply chain, and how BarTender can be part of that, particularly in the context and environment of today. So it's a very enjoyable bedtime reading for you guys as our partners. I must get around to reading it myself at some point soon. David, have you read this yet? I'm sure you'll say yes.
Yes, of course, Ian, you know me. I'm always the first one, reading all the new information.
Good job, good job. I like to hear it. Okay, here we can see the print portal. Print portal, which is the web application, is a very clean, nicely designed web application that makes it very clear as to what it is that you're doing and how you can access your BarTender documents. So a folder structure here on the left-hand side and also in the main area. And you can select one of the documents. And now we showed this in thumbnail view, but you can also switch it to a detailed view like so. And from the detailed view, you can also choose various other options. Let's switch back to the icon, shall we? We can also group our documents by various different metrics, categories perhaps, like so. So as you design a document, you can specify some metadata items for that document so that when published to the print portal, it allows you to perform various filtering and sorting modes, like so. You can sort, you can do all sorts of things to find the document you want. And indeed, if you want to find, so let's say we want to find some GHS labels somewhere in our folder, then it very quickly returns some results there for you. How do I have none? That's what I want. Like so. So it's very quick and very easy to find the documents that you want. Now, by default, with Print Portal, we have these two root folders. And if you're using the REST API, when you ask for the main libraries, these two root folders is what you'll get. The templates folder is for files, documents, and folders that are stored in the file system of the web server. Whereas, as the name suggests, librarian is those documents that are managed and stored as part of the document management system of librarian. Now, by default, if it's a managed document, you will not see any document that has not been published. Because Print Portal is very much a production printing application, if the document is going through its design process and has not been published, it will not be viewable in the user interface. Okay, so let's quickly, if I open up the designer, open up a document, like so, and this is from the file system. So what I'll do is I'll save that to my librarian location. In the documents folder, go with that name, hit save. And because it's part of the document management process, it asks me to make a comment. It's an initial commit. I add that, document saved. Now, of course, I'm using the document designer locally installed. It could be the case that my system database connection has been set up so that I'm connecting instead of to my database that's hosted on my computer, instead it could be connected to a database over the internet, or over our VPN, should we say, to the master database. Okay, I've saved the document, and indeed, if I switch over to librarian application, we can see that the document has indeed been stored as part of the design file state, so the initial state. Now, those states, those workflows can be defined as part of librarian setup. So in librarian setup, we have various workflows. We have workflow rules that define which workflow in particular will be executed for a document. If I take a look at this one, the one that we are using, we can see that there is, zoom in a little bit. The first state is design, then it moves on to an approval for review, and then on to production. When it reaches the production file state, that's when that document will appear for use in production in Print Portal. So let's quickly move it through that process. So currently my document, exit that, my document is in the design stage. Let's transition this for review. Does this look okay? Now, of course, ordinarily, as part of a design process, we would have various different revisions as we're designing the document from scratch and making changes before we then submit to review. But let's say there's a few different revisions already in place. This has now been put to review. And of course, as part of my approval process, I've set up an email notification so that as the document goes to that particular state, to the approval state, an email notification will be sent to the various defined users, asking them to make an approval of that document, to either approve or reject the document. And yes, I have that email. Here we have the email. It is true, I could have designed the email to be a bit more attractive to look at, but it gives you an idea that you can enter in some content, and we can make use of variables to, for example, pass in the comment that was made in the transition saying, does this look okay? And it also provides a link or buttons that you can click on to review and either approve or reject the document design. So if I click on that button, oh, really? Did I set that up? Sign in. Okay, so because it's a particular person who is either making an approval or a rejection of the document, it has asked me to authenticate myself, which luckily my password was up to date. And this takes us to the approve or reject section of Print Portal. So this is where an approval manager, for example, would be able to view the document design that they are to approve or reject to see if it meets the requirements for production. So here I will say approve. And of course, they can do this without needing to have the BarTender software installed locally on their machine, or perhaps even available to them via remote desktop or Citrix. So I can say, yes, this looks good to me, smiley face, and submit that. Approved. If I switch over to Librarian, we can see in just a moment when it refreshes. All right, I'll force the refresh, that the file state for this document is now production ready. So it's in the production file state. So we've transitioned from approval through to production file state. And with this document now production ready, if we go back to the print portal, we can see the document is now indeed available for selection and for printing. So we can select to print this label as we are doing now, using the web application directly as a user in an interactive fashion. I'll choose to print, and I believe there's a data entry form associated with this one. Yes, indeed there is. So Seagull Scientific to Premier Supply. And what I can do before I send the print job, what I'm going to do is via Printer Maestro, which if you recall is used for managing printers, I'm going to simply pause the print queue for this printer. It's now paused so that when I choose to produce a print job, print, get a response back, so it's successfully sent to the print spooler. And indeed, here we can see our print job has been created. I'll just let that go. With the print job produced and sent to the printer, we can then make use of the History Explorer. Just refresh this for all BarTender print jobs. This one here, produce print jobs, Seagull Scientific. There you go. Now, of course, everything here is all functioning locally, but of course we can make use of a BarTender out there in the internet. And indeed, we do have a demo site for this purpose, although it seems to get broken sometimes by someone messing around with it. So here we can see print.seagullscientific.com, which is our public demo site where you can, as any user, come to and select labels for printing for test purposes, like so. So this is running on an AWS server out on the internet, located somewhere on the west coast of the United States. You'll see here it's come up with a warning saying it's not seeing your printers, and this is because we need to set it up for connecting with our client print service. So we'll set that up. It's now registered. and I can configure my client print service. So this is the local Windows service that's running on my PC, and we can configure this on the local port, on the local system with this port number /settings. And we have two print servers. This is my print portal running on my laptop, and this is the print portal out on the internet. So from here, I can choose which printers that I wish to be able to print to from print portal. So it's selectable from the list. And if I wish to share that with other computers or other software applications, like a bespoke software application. So if I hit save, this then will expose these three printers for printing over the internet, for example, when using the REST API. If I try to print, so printers on my, you'll see that we have two lists here, printers on the server, but also matching printers on your computer. So if I choose barcode printer A, for example, and produce a print job. So remember, this is a print job being sent over the internet from Amazon Web Services in the United States down to my PC here in Spain. Print job is produced, and you'll notice that the printer is using this UNC path syntax, which indicates that it's been transported via the print router service down to the client print service and out through my local printer queue. So internet printing. And in fact, that was faster than my local setup, because of course I got a lot running on my local laptop PC at this very moment, whereas there's a nice fast AWS server that's running in the cloud instead. So it's faster to process such things. If web print client is also installed on this, on the IIS server, do you need, or do that allow to add more than one client to manage the client printers? Well, the client print service is to be installed on the client side. It's not to be installed on the server side. Remember, the print router service, which is installed as part of the BarTender installation of print portal, is what's running on the server side. The client prints service is for those Windows computers running on premise, so at your physical locations on the same local network where your printers are located. Perhaps it's the case the question is really about rather than needing to install the client print service on each and every client user, could it be the case that you install the client print service on just one nominated PC at on that local area network, at that physical location, and have all the users who are also at that location print the printers that particular client print service exposes? And the answer to that is yes, kind of. What I mean by that is, yes, it is possible, but the problem is, and this is in the context of using the REST API, the problem is that we want to be able to restrict the visibility of those printers only to certain users, particularly certain users of the same local area network or coming from the same domain. because you don't want to have users from other domains, from other locations, for example, being able to print jobs to that location either by accident or if they're being malicious. Now, it is possible if you're doing some sort of bespoke implementation of, as part of your implementation, putting stuff in place that allows you to do that. So it is possible, but again, it's not out of the box. And we're working on solutions to make it the case that, for example, you could make do with just the one client print service, perhaps on a print server at your physical location, so that all the users at that same physical location would be printing through that print server, and therefore they don't need to have the client print service installed on their own PCs.
Confirmation that yes, he was meaning the same LAN domain or VPN. So
yeah, so essentially, well, you don't need the VPN in this respect when using the print portal. But yes, it can be done via implementation as print portal is now, although could be a little bit complex in the implementation. But we are looking in this area so that we can very much simplify the transport of the print jobs down to the on-premise printers, particularly for locations where there are multiple users, so that those print jobs are all transported through the one client print service, which is a much simpler setup. Requires less configuration and effort if that were supported. I will squeeze those last 2 minutes. Just a quick heads up. Here I'm using a REST client application through which I can test the REST API. So I'm sending to my local host computer various REST-based web service requests. So with the authentication, I would pass in my credentials, get that token back, and then make requests, such as to get the libraries that are stored on my machine, the templates and the library, to get the content of a particular library based on the ID. So just put the ID at the end there. If I hit send there, it sends back the response, gives that information. And you can see that's all pretty instantaneous. Getting the printers. So here I can see my server-based printers, which would be used in an intranet style setup. And then we see the remote printers. So A, B, and C, as I configured in the print client service configuration. And then we can do the printing, such as printing where I set named data sources. And I would need to choose a particular label to do that. I just remembered that test.btw I deleted just recently. Yeah, you'd send the print request and you would get the response. Yes, thanks very much for attending, everyone. As you've seen, a certain amount of stuff can be done with BarTender on the cloud. Certainly, the opportunity and the possibility of the cloud can offer so much more than what we currently can do with BarTender. Thanks very much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Yeah. See you in 2 weeks' time to our next section. And thank you so much again for attending today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.